Hello and welcome to The Pulse. Here we give you front row insights into goings on in Zimbabwe's highest decision-making unit, Cabinet. Now, Cabinet met on Wednesday and discussed a wide array of issues, and agriculture was among them. So today we're joined by the Minister of Agriculture, Dr. Masuka, to help us discuss developments in the agriculture sector. Welcome to The Pulse.
Thank you.
Okay, for starters, the second round of the crop assessment program is complete, and there are quite a number of positives. For instance, in maize production, estimates are expected to rise by 58% from last season. What would you attribute the increase to?
Well, I think what we need to do is to step back to say that at the advent of the Second Republic, Zimbabwe was known for perennially importing food. And the Second Republic put in place a strategy dubbed the Agriculture and Food Systems Transformation Strategy to assure the nation of perennial food security, to eliminate food imports, but also to diversify exports, increase value addition and beneficiation, to increase employment in the agricultural sector, while concomitantly raising the standard of living, the livelihoods of predominantly rural people for the attainment of Vision 2030. And with this came a number of interventions. It started with capacitation of the extension staff, the 6,000 extension staff, physical motorization of those extension staff, availing the motorbikes, the mental motorization to ensure that they were ready in terms of the new business mindset, change management to deliver the results. And then, of course, the innovative, intensive climate proofing of agriculture through conservation agriculture dubbed Pfumvudza Intwasa, which in itself is a form of precision agriculture. Zimbabwe's soils, 74% are acidic and many in the communal areas. So we needed to focus on moisture retention, we needed to focus on organic matter, and we needed to focus on mulching. And these interventions have led to increases in maize production in the smallholder sector, and in particular in communal areas where up of close to 50% of the maize is produced.
Now, our initial target was 3 million metric tons, and we achieved around 2 million. Where did we fall short?
Yes, I think that we had said that we were going to do 1.9 million hectares of maize, and we were looking at least 1.5 tons per hectare. But as you know, the season started rather late, especially in the northern parts of the country, in the Mashonaland provinces, which have higher yields. So, and we also had very erratic rains in pockets of Masvingo, Mad South, and Mashonaland Central. So consequently, this affected the yields. So we saw the yields even under Pfumvudza go down to 2 tons, 2.4 tons per hectare from the previous high that we achieved in 2020, 2021 of over 5 tons per hectare because of this seasonal disruption. However, this actually perhaps emphasizes the importance of climate-proofing agriculture, that our fortunes must not be dependent on the weather. So we must climate-proof agriculture at the 2 levels, smallholder level, but we must also do that at larger holder level, where we must accelerate dam construction, and dam construction linked to a rapid irrigation development to assure the nation that whether we have rains or not, we will be able to get sufficient grains from irrigation from the 350,000 hectares of irrigation that are targeted from the current developments of 193,000 hectares.
Okay, we are projecting above 2 million metric tons. Is that enough for the country to be food secure?
Oh, certainly. Zimbabwe has now become very food secure. In terms of maize, the 2.3 million metric tons that we're projecting this year are against a human consumption estimated for the 15.1 million, assuming every Zimbabwean eats maize every day throughout the year. The 120 kgs per person per day, we will require 1.8 million metric tons. We have even factored now consumption by livestock of 450,000 metric tons from that maize, which will then bring us to just over 2.2 million metric tons. So we are above that. Just for maize alone, we have a surplus. But as you've seen, we also have traditional grains, and we should be able to produce sufficient traditional grains to add on to the maize that we have produced. As you have seen that we will be able to produce upwards of 280,000 to 300,000 metric tons of traditional grains. So overall, we will have 2.6, 2.7 million metric tons of cereals against a requirement for human and animal consumption of 2.2 million metric tons. This does not take into consideration the current stocks within GMB, which are over 300,000 metric tons. So we have over 600, if you add the two, we have over 600,000 metric tons of cereals, which we project as a surplus for this current season.
Are we going to be exporting, or perhaps it's something you're looking at keeping for strategic reserves?
As part of the major policy interventions in agriculture, in noting that there is climate change and Zimbabwe is predicted to become drier in the decades ahead, Cabinet took a policy position that will increase our physical cereal stock from the current maize-denominated stock of 750,000 metric tons target to 1.5 million metric tons, made up of 1.2 million metric tons of maize and 300,000 metric tons of traditional grains. So we have a ready market for all the production, that surplus that we have this year and for the coming years, and that will be earmarked to build a resilient strategic grain reserve sufficient to carry this country for 3 seasons should there not be any rainfall.
Okay, let's look at cotton production. There was a 3% increase. Would you as a ministry tap yourself on the back and say you've done a good job?
In fact, it's more than that. We are projecting over 150,000 metric tons of cotton from just over 116,000 metric tons target that we achieved last year. So the performance is good, but we also had major problems in Masvingo and also in Manicaland, where we had very late start to the rains and a prolonged dry period. And as you know, that area is a high cotton production area, so that suffered as a result of that. There also a lower production in the Mzarabani area, again exactly as a result of the low rainfall received in that part of the country. So those two pulled down the production. But we are going to consolidate the climate proofing agenda and ensure that the climate proofed cotton production is going to be accelerated, and it is this season that we started. But with more of that, we'll be able to see that just like Fumvuza Intwasa, we'll be able to get more production from cotton. So I'm happy and satisfied with the production by farmers under very difficult circumstances.
The producer price has been a major issue of concern by farmers. Are we likely to see an improvement in the producer price, cotton producer price, that is?
Oh, of course, they will see improvements across all the crops. For cotton, for example, we've already announced that to incentivize better quality and to pay farmer effort, we will have a great differentiated pricing regime. We've also said that cotton will be treated as an export crop, just like tobacco. So farmers will retain 85% of their value in US dollars. And cotton and Kotco is geared to purchase. Government is also increasing its shareholding in Kotco to ensure that we have better control and better payment, and so that we incentivize farmers. It is farmer viability that will undergird the transformation that we are looking for in the agricultural sector. For the rest of the maize and cereals, traditional grains, soybean, sunflower, we will be announcing the summer marketing plans in the next day or two.
But maize farmers would also look at this incentive and wish for it to be paid in foreign currency.
Yes,
Is government
certainly.
considering that?
Certainly, we are paying all crops in a proportion in foreign currency, noting that fertilizers and other inputs that are desired by farmers are in foreign currency. So we have computed this and taken this into consideration. A proportion, in fact, the larger proportion will be paid in US dollars, and another proportion will be paid in Zimbabwe dollars at the ruling exchange rate. So we think this will incentivize, motivate farmers for higher productivity and also for expanded area under production for the various crops.
Okay, let's look at horticulture. Tea production is projected to decline by 9%. Where did the wheels come off?
In terms of horticulture production, we're very pleased with the production of all the various crops because the production has increased very significantly. But the tea crop is unique. First, you must know that Zimbabwe produces very thin teas, not comparable to Kenya, not comparable to Rwanda, and those areas closer to the equator, even not comparable to Malawi. But the major decline in tea production is arising out of smallholder tea production contribution reducing very drastically because the green tea is sold to established factories and the viability there is a challenge. So also the established factories themselves are pulling tea and replacing this with more productive crops such as macadamia, such as avocado. So this trend will continue. What we think ought to happen in the tea sector is for them to move from seedling tea to clonal tea and getting better genetics and better quality tea to increase both yield and quality for niche markets.
Certainly, tea lovers would love to see tea production going up, given that we're moving towards winter. But let's look at the citrus production area. There's a huge market in Asia, and what are we doing to tap into that market as a country?
In fact, for the tea production that we have, about 60% of our tea is exported, so we do have sufficient for the local consumption.
So
especially for the primary
our grandmothers should never worry about shortage of their favorite brands.
Yeah, especially for the teas that are consumed locally, we have sufficient.
Okay.
We export quite a lot. In terms of citrus, we must take first into consideration the long gestation period. It takes up to 3-4 years for a citrus plantation to come into full production. There are opportunities availed by China, and we just entered into an agreement between Zimbabwe and China to export citrus to China. And we will be trialing our first consignments this citrus production season this year. There are disruptions in Europe in terms of additional requirements, but certainly the markets in China should provide the pull effect that is desired to ensure expansion. Zimbabwe is also very unique citrus growing areas. The area around Maize is perhaps one of the best citrus growing environments in the world. And government has invested over 300 million in building the Tugwimukosi lake, 1.8 billion cubic meters, and it can irrigate 40,000 hectares. Fortunately, we've identified 25,000 hectares around that Maize area, so we think there will be very substantial expansion there, and there are already investors in that part of the country that are investing in citrus production, so we expect a rapid increase in citrus production in the years ahead.
Blueberries, there's a huge appetite for blueberries in Europe. Mm-hmm. And are we doing enough? Are we producing enough blueberries to satisfy that demand as a country?
You can see that there is a very steep increase in the volume of blueberries that's coming on board, largely driven by the orchards coming into maturity and therefore beginning to yield as desired optimal yields. But blueberries are a niche crop requiring niche markets. So that progress, I think, has to be managed. It has to be tailored to the niche markets. We have UAE, we have Europe, and we think that we'll continue to see some continued increase in production in blueberries, but the cost per hectare is also prohibitive at 10 to 16,000 US dollars per hectare. So unless there are financing arrangements or value chain financing arrangement to provide the resources to be able to increase that, I think that growth will be moderated in the years ahead, but it's simply dependent on the markets that we also find.
But the blueberry production is largely dominated by white farmers, commercial farmers, and more black people would want to venture into that. Is government coming up with a deliberate policy to ensure that indigenous farmers get funding to venture into this lucrative area?
Oh, certainly under the Horticulture Rehabilitation and Development Plan, we're saying that we need value chain financing. We now need the banks to come on board. So we also want innovative indigenous farmers to look at that area as an area of business and be able to do more. Government's primary focus, we have prioritized agriculture and said the major and overriding aspect for the government is to ensure food security for the nation and to assure this nation of perennial food security. So that is where the thrust of government has been. Now that we've attained that, we want to be able to build more of the strategic grain reserve. We've also said that we wanted to feed security so that we can provide enough to grow the livestock sector, especially the poultry sector, which constitutes 70% of the feed requirement. Then we said the third thing is we want oil seeds security. We spend 280, 300 million US dollars annually importing crude oil for decanting, repackaging, and selling in the local market, whereas we can produce enough sunflower, enough cotton, enough soybean, enough groundnuts to be able to do that. Once we have achieved that, we can then begin to look at how we'll be able to assist with the exact interventions. But for now, this is largely private sector-led, the growth that we are seeing in blueberries and other horticultural crops, although government has provided this enabling policy and legislative environment to enable that private sector growth.
Lastly, Minister, agriculture, like any other sector, is becoming heavily digitized from planting to output and even marketing. How is Zimbabwe faring in this respect?
Well, it's never about comparing what Zimbabwe is doing in terms of ICT compared to others. It is needs-driven. We now have the Agriculture Information Management System, which envisages that agriculture managed as a business must be ICT-centered and ICT-driven so that you can reduce costs, so that you can be more precise, so that you can improve viability, you can improve profitability. So ICT is a necessary input in any agricultural transformation, and government realizes this. When we do this livestock, crops, and fisheries assessment, we use ICTs, we use satellite-based assessment systems for area assessment. We're also looking at yield assessment. We can use ICTs for traceability for livestock, for mapping water resources, for anticipating cyclones and other weather-related hazards. But we can do so much more with ICT. We can even track soil moisture, irrigability of soils. So ICT is a necessary ingredient and input in the transformation of agriculture that's taking place.
But roughly how much would it cost us as a country if we are to fully digitize the agriculture sector?
I think we've not looked at it from that perspective, because that would be to dissuade a few people from actually doing that. If you look at what we are doing with drone technologies, for example, we are able now, in terms of migratory pest control, to go out 100 kilometers and be able to spray a flock of clear the birds and control that using that's ICT-based platform. We are now able to look at the 10,000 dams that we have and say where are they and how much of the water are we actually utilizing. We are able in the irrigation space to remotely control center pivots and be able to do precision irrigation So a lot is already happening in this space.
Is this technology available locally if, for our farmers?
It is indeed available locally, and next week, alongside the trade fair, there is a major Africa-wide Smart Africa conference where various presidents from across Africa will be attending, and our own president, and we'll be focusing on ICTs in Africa, and agriculture is one of the topics for discussion.
In terms of cost cutting, from a farmer's perspective, how is ICT going to assist in cutting cost of production?
Well, certainly, if you are going to only irrigate when there is a requirement for irrigation, it means that it is precise, it's in its best. If it is going to be disease assessment, it means that you will only be able to spray when a threshold has been reached. If it is quillia control, it means that instead of driving to a particular area, you can activate a drone to be able to go and attack the quillia beds. If it is fertilizer application, instead of running up and down with a tractor, you'll be able to deploy a drone. If it is herbicide application, you can equally do that. So ICT is a necessary ingredient, and it will lower costs throughout.
Our local universities and technical colleges taking advantage of this digitization of the farming sector, agriculture sector?
Oh, certainly. We have the incubation hubs at all the state universities. A while ago with Marondera University of Agricultural Sciences and Technology, and they were displaying the use of drones in fertilizer application, in herbicide application, and many other aspects. And so I expect that universities will be able to continue to develop the cost-effective ICT-based interventions, and farmers increasingly will be able to uptake this, and especially because we now have more excitement from among the youth to go into agriculture, and so I expect that we'll be able to leapfrog in this area.
On that technology tip, I should thank you very much, Dr. Masuka, for joining us on The Pulse. That was Dr. Masuka discussing with us developments in the country's agriculture sector. That is a wrap for us this week. Thank you very much for joining us. Be sure to join us again next week, same time, as we keep our fingers on the pulse. Pleasant viewing.